All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into India's 2026 budget. And let me tell you, this is way more than just a plan for the next 12 months. Think of it as a blueprint for the next 2 decades of India's economy.
And right from the top, the message is crystal clear. We're not talking about small adjustments here. The signal is that it's time to move from just talking to actually doing, from short-term populist moves to long-term performance. It's all about transformation.
So, you might be asking, what's behind this huge push for transformation? Well, this budget isn't just about crunching numbers for a single year. Nope. It's a single but absolutely critical piece of a much, much bigger puzzle.
And that big puzzle has a name, Viksit Bharat 2047. Now, this is the big one. It's the national mission, the North Star, guiding every single policy decision in this budget. The goal is huge. Transform India into a fully developed economy by 2047, right on its 100th birthday. So everything we're about to talk about, it's all a step on that long road.
Okay, so with that huge goal in mind, let's zoom out and look at the big picture. What's the core philosophy here? What are the principles guiding this entire economic roadmap?
Well, the whole thing is built on what the government is calling the three kartavyas, which basically means foundational duties. It's pretty straightforward. First, speed up economic growth and make sure it lasts. Second, make sure that growth actually helps people achieve their dreams. And third, build a system where everyone has fair access to resources and opportunities, a level playing field. These three duties, they are literally the DNA of this budget.
All right, principles are great, but how do you actually turn them into real, tangible growth? Let's pop the hood and get into the engine room to see what's really going to power the economy.
Whoa. The very first thing you notice is just the sheer size of the investment. We're talking about a staggering 12.2 lakh crore rupees. That's 12.2 trillion rupees. And it's all going into what's called capital expenditure. Essentially, it's a massive bet on building the physical backbone of a modern India. You know, the roads, the ports, the power grids. And look, this isn't just about randomly paving more roads. This spending is super strategic. We're talking about new freight corridors so goods can move way faster, 20 new national waterways for cleaner transport, 7 brand new high-speed rail lines linking up major economic centers. And here's the really important part. It's not just about the big megacities. A huge focus is on bringing that same modern infrastructure to the smaller, up-and-coming Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. The idea is to spread the growth all across the country.
But infrastructure is only one piece of the puzzle. The second big engine of growth is this massive push to turn India into a global manufacturing powerhouse, especially in those really high-tech, strategic sectors.
And they're not messing around. The investment is super targeted. You've got the India Semiconductor Mission 2.0, which is all about building a full-blown domestic chip industry from scratch. Then there's Biopharma Shakti, a 10,000 crore rupee plan to make India a world leader in biopharma. The budget for electronics parts almost doubled, and they're even setting up new corridors just to make sure they have a steady supply of those critical rare earth minerals.
Of course, it's not all about the giant corporations, right? The budget is also looking at the backbone of the economy, the MSMEs. That's the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. There's a dedicated 10,000 crore rupee fund just for them, to give them equity support. The goal? To create what they're calling champion MSMEs that can really hold their own and compete on the world stage.
So, you can build all the shiny new factories and roads you want, but that's really only half the battle. If you want growth that lasts, you've got to future-proof the whole country, and that means investing in two things: people and technology.
So how do you do that? Well, they're setting up a new high-powered committee to tackle this head-on. Their whole mission is to totally realign India's education system with the jobs of the future. They're going to be focusing heavily on the services sector and making sure that when students graduate, they actually have the skills that companies are desperate for.
And you can really see this focus on future skills in the big push to weave AI into, well, everything. And this isn't some abstract futuristic idea. We're talking about real practical stuff, like Bharat V-Star, which is an AI tool that gives farmers customized advice, or setting up labs for animation and gaming in 15,000 schools. The plan is to get AI into the school curriculum right from the start, and at the same time, reskill the tech professionals we already have.
Okay, a plan this big and this ambitious costs money, a lot of money. So the big question is, how is the government going to pay for all of it? That brings us to taxes. And, maybe even more interestingly, how the stock market reacted to the whole thing.
First up, on the tax side, the big news is a completely new Income Tax Act. After a massive review, they're rolling out a much simpler tax code. The whole point is to make it easier for regular people and businesses to file their taxes and stay compliant.
Now, you'd think that a budget so focused on growth would have the markets cheering, right? Well, what actually happened was the complete opposite. India's big stock indexes, the Sensex and the Nifty, took a nosedive. So, what happened? What spooked all the investors?
Well, a huge part of the answer lies in something called the Securities Transaction Tax, or STT. They hiked it. A lot. The tax on futures trading more than doubled. Taxes on options went up too. For anyone who trades actively, this makes it more expensive to do business, plain and simple. And that made the market a lot less attractive, at least in the short term, which is why we saw that big sell-off.
And all of this brings us to the central challenge, not just for this budget, but for the entire Viksit Bharat mission. How on earth do you balance this incredibly bold, incredibly expensive ambition with smart, responsible financial discipline?
Because even with all this massive spending, the government says it's sticking to what's known as fiscal consolidation. That's just a fancy way of saying they're committed to spending responsibly. The fiscal deficit, that's the gap between what the government spends and what it brings in, is actually set to keep going down. The plan is to shrink that gap little by little, year after year, to make sure the country's finances stay healthy for the long haul.
So this is the tightrope they have to walk. On one side, you have this absolutely massive 12.2 lakh crore push to build a 21st century economy. But on the other side, you have this very strict promise to bring down the deficit and reduce the national debt. Juggling those two things successfully, that is the whole ballgame.
And that leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? The blueprint is there. It's a roadmap that combines huge investment with careful financial planning. But can they really maintain this delicate balance, not just for a year, but for the next 2 decades to finally achieve that dream of a developed India? The answer to that question is going to define India's economic story for generations.